Okay, I'll get started with the intro and then we can just keep this moving along. So hopefully no one will miss the prime time content there. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, or even evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome. I'm thrilled to have you with us for what promises to be an insightful and energizing session, navigating crisis in a divided and disruptive world, strategic communications at the crossroad of culture, chaos, and commerce. We live in a time when organizations are tested daily by crisis, rapid change, and shifting public perception. In this environment, communications and leaders don't just react, they shape the narrative, build trust, and guide their organizations through uncertainty. Today's discussion is all about that: how to lead with clarity, protect reputation, and build resilience, even when the pressure is high. We're incredibly fortunate to be joined by three exceptional professionals whose careers span healthcare, corporate strategy, military leadership, and crisis response. First, we're going to hear from Michael Lauer, a seasoned communications strategist with over 20 years of experience across pharmaceuticals, medical device, and consumer healthcare. He spent several years at Johnson & Johnson's global corporate affairs team, supporting the Office of Chief Medical Officer. He's a past president of the Pearson, New Jersey chapter and currently serves as an adjunct professor here at Rutgers University and is instructor in our program. Next, we'll be joined by Lauren Schultz, a powerhouse leader with a deep experience in both corporate and military worlds. She currently leads global communications for CRH, the world's largest provider of building material solutions. Before that, she served as AVP and head of global communications for Verizon Business. Lauren also had a distinguished 20-year career in the U.S. Marine Corps, retiring as a lieutenant colonel. Her roles range from leading civil affairs teams to directing public affairs for the Marine Forces Europe and Africa and serving in combat zones in Iraq and the Middle East. And finally, we're going to hear from Brian Grace, a former chief communications officer at Nationwide. Brian has led corporate, internal, and crisis communications for Fortune 100 companies across financial services, aerospace, defense, and retail. Today, he advises executive teams, boards, and organizations on reputational strategy, change management, and stakeholder trust. Each speaker will offer individual remarks, and then we'll open a Q&A. So please, as you listen, drop your questions into the Q&A box. We'll get to as many as we can at the end of the session. And as you know, today's event is hosted by Rutgers University School of Communications and Information Continuing and Professional Studies. We offer practical, high-impact programs for professionals who want to lead, influence, and grow. In the world of noise, the best leaders don't wait for clarity, they create it. And that's exactly what our online certificate programs on public relations and crisis communication and reputation management at Rutgers are designed to do. Help professionals lead with confidence, protect reputation, and navigate disruption. We have, just as background, we have two programs: the Crisis Communication and Reputation Management Certificate, and that helps you plan for, manage, and recover from crisis while strengthening long-term trust and resilience. And our Public Relations Certificate helps you sharpen your strategy, storytelling, and stakeholder engagement, so you can drive meaningful results in a fast-moving media landscape. Both programs are 100% online, flexible, and designed for busy professionals like all of you. And one more reason to stay to the end: when we wrap up, Scott will be spinning the wheel and we'll be selecting one lucky attendee to receive a discount towards Rutgers certificate programs. So don't log off early. With that, let's dive in, and please welcome our first speaker, Michael Lauer.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Hi, everyone. So happy to be here with you all today. I'm looking forward to a wonderful discussion. So I guess to kick things off, I have a couple examples of crises in the past, ranging from 40 years ago all the way to present day. But before I dive into those, what I thought would be helpful, as we were actually practicing earlier this week, we were kind of comparing notes a little bit about our previous experiences. And I think one common thread that emerged was between Lauren, Brian, and myself. We all either have direct or indirect experience working for the federal government. So I bring that up because what better place to anticipate a crisis than working for the federal government? So I'll quickly tell my story, which I think was a perfect introduction to not only PR and communications, but crisis communications. And I still carry some of the lessons learned from that with me today. And so I pretty much began my career at the ripe old age of 23, 24, right out of college. And I was fortunate enough to join the United States Capitol Police Department in Washington, D.C. And because I had a background in communications and some experience, I was able to move into the office of the Public Information Office. So, as the PIO, one of the PIOs for the department, I was responsible for responding to media inquiries and crises. And another fortunate event that happened while I was there, fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you want to look at it, is there's lots of ceremonies, there's lots of events always happening on Capitol Hill, and so during my time there is when Ronald Reagan passed away. So they had an official lying in state ceremony for former President Reagan, and as the event was going on, the entire U.S. government was literally in the Capitol building in one building, which is very rare for obvious reasons. And smack in the middle of that event, as I was in the command center with a whole bunch of other agencies, and we were monitoring, all kinds of information that was coming in, there was an airplane that came into restricted airspace while this event was going on, and it caused chaos. So it went from nice and smooth to immediate chaos in about 10 seconds, to the point where there was a full-on evacuation of the building. Dignitaries were getting taken away in vehicles and helicopters. It was madness. And I was on the receiving end of the media calling to say what was going on. Fortunately, it was not an event that we had to necessarily worry about. But that experience alone, to understand the gravity of potentially what could have happened, and then now reflecting back on how would have responded as a communications professional, really does inform how I think about crises, either for clients that I'm supporting, companies that I've worked for, or just on the outside as I look as other companies are going through their own crises. And so I also try to infuse a little bit of that perspective in the class that I teach, as Michael mentioned, in my role as an adjunct professor with the continuing professional education team, and teaching the crisis certificate course. So what I'll do, I'm going to pull up a couple slides and walk through a couple of examples. And these aren't just from my perspective. I actually use these as part of my coursework as well. And it's really interesting to see the reaction from different professionals. I will say a lot of the students in my classes are military, active duty, or retired, but there's a heavy military focus on the course. So it's really interesting to get their perspectives as well. So this first case study, and I'll keep these pretty brief, is an incident that happened in 2013 with a railway company called MMA Railway that operate up in Canada, in the Northeast. And unfortunately, they had a pretty serious train derailment. And there was, lives were impacted. As you can see from the photo on the right, there was a pretty scary scene. And so within a couple days, naturally, the media came asking for questions, and someone wound up getting an interview with the CEO, Robert Grindrod. Um, and I'm going to spare you all from the pain that is the interview that transpired. It's only about 5 minutes long. If you're really interested, it's on YouTube if you want to just Google his name. But um, right from the outset, there was lack of empathy. There was zero compassion. There was no information. He actually, at one point, made the story about himself, saying, "I know how it feels because I've lost loved ones." And it was just a masterclass in what not to do in managing a crisis. And so this very much stuck out for me. And when my students, get to this part of the assignment, they all collectively, you can hear them kind of, shudder a little bit, because it's pretty terrible. So, yeah, I would say anyone who's in a crisis role or anticipates being in a crisis situation, and managing the release of information, this is, perhaps a case study you want to take a look at, because you may find yourself in the position where you're counseling your executives, your CEO, about how to respond. So there could be some really interesting lessons learned there. Next up, again, another example that I use in my class. This is more recent. This was in early 2024, so just about a year ago. And the CEO of Kellogg's, with the backdrop of the economic uncertainty that was kind of unfolding in the country at that time, went on MSNBC. And I assume with the support of his full marketing team and the board and everyone else, made the recommendation that families should consider eating cereal for breakfast. So you can only imagine how that landed. And actually, during the middle of the interview, the host, the MSNBC host, paused and said, "Are you really sure that that's what you're recommending?" And he doubled down. And he said, "Yes, absolutely. It's a wonderful idea. It's economical." And so immediately the company received some pretty heavy blowback. There was calls for boycotts against Kellogg's. I think the stock did temporarily take a dip. But the reason why I like to use this as part of my class is certainly there's a tone deafness to this. But the question I pose to the students is, does this rise to the level of a true crisis, a true corporate crisis scenario? And they're pretty divided. Some say yes because of the impact to the stock and the brand impact, that negative brand impact that was observed right after this. But then quickly it kind of faded away. And so I think some of the other students kind of see this as, maybe it wasn't the best moment in time for the organization, but it certainly wasn't a full blown crisis. And by all accounts, there was no real crisis response activation in response to this interview and this campaign, right? So it was a campaign, didn't perform well. I think the strategy was, we're just going to move on. And again, fortunately or unfortunately for Kellogg's, I think this crisis went away as another crisis, kind of reared its head, and that was all around the ingredients that are in their cereal and their products. And so that crisis has, continued on. And so, you can look at it as replacing one crisis for another. Maybe that's not, what everyone hopes for. But I raise this example only to say not every crisis is the same. And so some require responses, some don't. Some require acknowledgement, maybe some don't. So it's not a one size fits all approach for sure. And the last example, I'm sure everyone is probably familiar with, again, a very unfortunate incident that happened nearly over 40 years ago in the early 80s, where Johnson & Johnson, as Michael mentioned, I spent several years on the team at Johnson & Johnson, so I got to learn about this case study from the inside out. But this is, by all definitions, by all accounts, the master class, the gold star case study example of how to manage a crisis. And so quickly for folks that maybe don't know what happened, um, back in the early 80s, there was no real seal on medicine bottles. And so someone went into a supermarket in Chicago in the suburbs and tampered with the medicine and actually put poison in the bottles. And shortly after, some folks wound up ingesting that medication and died. And so there was several deaths related to this. And so immediately the company went to crisis mode. They recalled all the products. They stood up a media center in New York City to kind of triage and manage any media relations. And within about a month or a month and a half, they had this fully under control. And J&J walked out with the reputation not only intact, but I think it helped improve the reputation as a responsible steward, corporate steward. And one of the good things that came out of this very unfortunate situation as part of the response by the J&J folks was creating tamper-proof packaging. So putting wrappers around the bottle and putting the foil on there so no one could ever tamper with their medications again. So again, from 4 years ago, this is still very much looked upon as, how to best approach a crisis, certainly of that magnitude. So let me just stop sharing my screen. I guess the last thing I'll say is, as PR professionals, whether you're in a full-time crisis role or if you're in any other kind of corporate role, there is a role for you to play as part of your organization's crisis response team. So if you are unaware of what that plan is, certainly go inquire. If you want to take an active role in helping to shape that plan, I think that's strongly encouraged. This is a lot of what we cover in the course that I teach. But the last thing I'll say is even the best crisis plans kind of can go to the wayside. You can't anticipate every crisis imaginable. So having a solid plan, practicing that plan, updating it from time to time, and just kind of staying on top of some of the trends of how to get information out quickly, how to respond. Certainly as AI and social media and other tools become available, certainly they should be factored into your plans as well. So with that, I think, Michael, am I turning it to Lauren?
Yeah, we'll turn over to Lauren, and just one thought, Michael, as you're saying about every plan,
Yes,
but you should update it. I think it was Mike Tyson said everyone had a plan until I punched them in the face. So,
this is true.
and you basically your whole point was you're going to get punched in the face sometimes, so be prepared for that. So,
It's almost inevitable. Yes, if you're going to make a 30-year career in PR, it's going to happen. Unfortunately,
yes.
yes.
So,
I was
with
thinking
that,
of that exact Mike Tyson quote is everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. I don't think he said he was going to punch you. I think that would kind of
there you go.
that
There
would
you
be a
go.
little knock you out, but it's absolutely. And Michael Lauer, you said earlier, if you're not involved, encouraged to get involved in that crisis comms planning. I would absolutely second that. I think the comms professional in the organization should 100% be involved in that process. There's so much that your leadership team or your organization can gain when the communications team is involved in not just the execution, but the planning. And how you communicate in each of those situations is probably one of the most important things that you can do.
Indeed, absolutely.
So, well, with that, we'll turn over to Lauren.
All right, so I'm going to go into a little bit. I think off of the case studies, it's good to go into a little bit of the why and the how and where we are. And I hope that you take away one or two things from this. I'm going to share here. Give me 1 second. All right. So as Michael Charenson said earlier, I've spent about 21.5 years in the United States Marine Corps. I retired as a lieutenant colonel out of the reserves. The first 6 to 10 years of that career, I was in several different roles, not associated with public affairs. But if you know a Marine or are familiar with the Marine Corps, every Marine is a spokesperson for the Marine Corps. I think that's why the Marine Corps has got one of the greatest brands in the world. Hopefully still a very positive one, despite things that are happening today. But absolutely, after 6, 7, 8 years in the military as an air controller, I transitioned into public affairs, and I spent the rest of my time in the Marines supporting different units and the Pentagon with public affairs initiatives. I spent some time here in New York City, where I am today, working with the Armed Forces Public Affairs Unit. And about a month into the job, just out of the information school that the Department of Defense puts on, I was supporting Fleet Week in New York City. And as a new public affairs officer, I went down to one of the sites where we were bringing in the MV-22 Ospreys into a park in Manhattan. And as and I was on the plane, I was with the commander of the unit, we were on the aircraft. And as we're landing into this park, where all of these wonderful New Yorkers and tourists were gathered to see the Marines and this amazing piece of machinery, it lands. There was a handful of folks that decided to stand in front of the area that was blocked off to give the aircraft ample space to land. They wanted to get a really good view. And as we're landing, there was a couple of trees that were dead that we didn't know. And the trees blew over into that area that no one was supposed to be in and just caused havoc. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. But as we're coming off the MV-22, I was one of the last people off the aircraft thinking, oh man, this is going to be so much fun. And I'm skipping off the plane, and I just see like a baby carriage flipped over. There was no baby in it. And there was no one was seriously hurt. The tree down, and within what felt like 30 seconds, there was a line of local news trucks at the edge of the park. And my boss at the time calls me. He was in Times Square, and in the ticker, the big ticker in Times Square, it said MV-22 crashes in park in New York City. That wasn't the case, but you can imagine the crisis that ensued after that. Calls from the Pentagon. Police and fire showed up. Again, fortunately, nobody was hurt, but being able to communicate so quickly with the commander that was with us to the media that was on site, we were able to squash the rumor and the misinformation right away. And that was not something that I was prepared for. So that was a big punch in the face. But again, fortunately, everybody was okay. Nobody was hurt. So really quick lesson learned. And I will say, since then, as a public affairs and now PR and communications professional, I have been involved in my share of crises, and how quickly you communicate, how well you are connected with the leadership is so important. And I'll get into that in a minute. So the current environment we're in, I would say it is very fast. There is an evolution of the media landscape, but I don't think we've been here before. So the trust in media and the trust in certain organizations, if you look at either the Edelman Trust Barometer or some of the other studies, the Gallup polls that are out there, it's something that kind of ebbs and flows. There's peaks and troughs here. There is a significant amount of distrust with media and with big organizations right now. So there's multiple uphills that we have to climb. But with that, there's certainly opportunity. So there's less reporters. I think if anyone's been paying attention to the news, you see rounds of layoffs with the big news outlets, the small news outlets. They're shifting their models on how they operate. We're even seeing shrinkage of a lot of our PR agencies that we rely so heavily on. So there's less reporters out there. A lot of reporters you've seen have turned into content creators. I don't know if this is for the first time. It's the first time that I can remember that within the administration, with the press corps, you've got all sorts of influencers and podcasters as part of the press pool now, which is something new. So there's a different approach that your traditional reporter or journalist is taking to report news, that you now have a lot of these content creators, different mediums like Reddit threads, TikTok stitches, all of these things that we need to be paying attention to help your organization cut through all of that misinformation. So there's a bit of an evolution, but again, I don't think this is a place that we haven't been before. It makes our role more important, and it makes the way that we're delivering our news and the trust and credibility that we have just even more valuable. So that trust, control, that credibility. A lot of times you talk about earned news, how you have to own the story. That is still a goal always, but less and less do I see that as where I focus my team's attention. It's more about earning that trust. Our interactions with a lot of reporters, journalists, editors today, none of them, they never have been transactional. This is a long-term, long-term relationship that you have to build. And as I've moved to different industries, I'm in a whole new industry now. It's a whole different set of journalists. And so the hard part right now is just building up before you can get good headlines or good stories, building those relationships, educating the folks, spending a lot of time in person. I know that sounds crazy, but I spend a ton of time in person with reporters and journalists, meeting them, talking about what's going on in there, what's going on overall in the whole media landscape, and then of course what's going on in our industry. So building that trust is table stakes. I think another shift, again, we've been here before, is our audiences don't want to be told. Michael gave you the example of Tylenol. When that happened in the 80s, we all received our news from 5 o'clock television, and it's a one-way conversation. So you're being told what's happening. A lot has changed. This is obvious probably for many of you, but it's a two-way conversation now. And our roles as the PR professionals, the comms professionals, we have to get involved in that conversation, not be afraid to get into that conversation, because that's where a lot of news is going to happen. And then that's also where your opportunity to provide that clarity is going to emerge. So that's the role of PR, right? It's again, I don't see a massive shift in what we do, just the expanded role. We talked a lot about crisis management already. You have to be a part of that planning. You can't come into a crisis and be given a plan and said, okay, this is what happened now, comms, guys, go message this. You have to know from the very beginning the context around when and how you're going to communicate, what level of crisis it's going to be. So again, I would just kind of say loud again, you have to be part of that planning process. You come in at the end to execute on a crisis plan. You won't be able to have the same results as if you were at the table from the very beginning. And the team, right? So we all have comms teams, the comms team of the future. The way that we look at this, our roles have shifted. There's technology shaping the comms team as a function, but the comms team itself, I think, needs to be more business focused. Some of the most successful comms professionals that I have on my team came from operating companies. I had that experience in the military. I came from a unit. I was part of a platoon. I was part of a squadron when I was working in the air wing, and I had that experience before I became a public affairs officer where I had a message. So if you have that opportunity to learn the industry or to come from a point of business or operations, I do think that will help as you become a comms professional and rise through the ranks and start owning the messaging. It just helps so much when you were there. Again, I think that's probably very obvious, but when I hire, I look for that a lot of times. Now, if you started off in an agency, if you started off, great, own it. But as you're building your team, bring in that diversity of expertise will help make the whole team much, much stronger. Again, the agility, the curiosity, the cross-platform fluency is so important today. And then, of course, leveraging all the technology tools that are out there makes my job a lot easier. I use chat a lot, and there's times at the end of the day where I want to thank chat for all the help and all the work they did. And I have to remind myself, well, that's not an actual person, and you'd be crazy to do that. But it is certainly, you'd be left behind if you don't start to embrace that type of technology. And then just the very last sort of sum here is the strategic importance of what we do. It's very noisy. It's always been very noisy. The noise shows up in different places today, but it's our role to bring the signal. The facts are messy. There's misinformation. There's disinformation. People are looking for people that they trust. So be the person that helps your organization bring clarity to what's happening in the external environment. And then, of course, being able to manage under pressure. A lot of that comes with planning. A lot of that comes with preparation. But if you can be the person that brings the common counsel to your organization, you'll be looked to as not only the comms professional, but as a strategic partner, an ally, and you're not alone. As I said before, building that team, of course, building that team internally to your comms function, but then building cross-functional coalitions and collaboration with legal, with human resources, with marketing, operations, finance. All of that will help you move faster, have a greater impact, and have more credibility, both internally to your organization and externally to all your stakeholders. So that's sort of my perspective of where we're at today. I hope that was helpful, and I will pass it on back to you, Mike.
No, that was great. Thank you, Lauren. And let's put a pin in when we go to Q&A about how to that cross department and how to get other folks in your organization involved. That's a great topic for Q&A, because I know a lot of folks that whether you're in a government, a corporation, or even agency, how do you get your others involved, and you build a coalition internally. So let's put a pin in that. So thank you. So let's turn over to Brian, and then after Brian, we'll go to Q&A. So if you can, start thinking of your questions. And then after Brian's done, we'll come back and we'll do some Q&A. So take it over, Brian.
Great. And it's funny, Lauren, that you talk about working so closely with ChatGPT that you want to, thank it. I actually do that. I say, please, I thank it for its work. I show it the results of something that maybe we created in the real world. And the reason I do that is, I don't know if anybody on the call has ever done this before, but there's a particular prompt you can put into, whether it's ChatGPT or Llama or Claude or Perplexity, that prompts it to release to you its profile of you. What does it know about you? And actually, there are personality attributes. It understands how you treat it, and it extrapolates that to how you treat other people. So I don't think it's a waste of time at all. As Michael said at the outside, I'm a multi-time CCO who spent time with Pentagon and NASA contractors, one of the nation's largest retailers, two giants in insurance and financial services. And today I advise CEOs on marketing, branding, and communications. And like my friends Michael and Lauren, I've been through my share of crises. And what I'm going to talk about today is based entirely on what I've learned from being in the line of fire, if you will. So if you give me just a second here, I'm going to share my deck. I should be showing up in front of this in just a second. There I am. Okay. I hope everybody can see that. And so to kick us off, I'm going to kind of create a scene for you, if you will. Let me take you back, not to Twitter, not to cable news, but to the streets of Boston in the 1760s. And there's a newspaper on the corner, the Boston Gazette, and its publisher, Samuel Adams, is not just reporting the news, he's shaping a revolution. But what you may not know is Adams wasn't above a little fiction when it suited the cause. Week after week, the Gazette published sensational stories, claims that British soldiers were molesting local women, that they were violating the sanctity of colonial homes, terrorizing the streets. The only problem is none of it was true. So these stories were manufactured. They were crafted to provoke outrage, to rally colonists against the crown, to inflame moral panic. And Adams didn't just write about the events, he used the press to incite them. He even called for readers to take action, quote, hang a tax official in effigy, destroy his home, destroy his office, end quote. And this wasn't some underground pamphlet. This was one of the most influential newspapers in the colonies. And when the ink dried, Sam Adams, and his allies would gather after hours in the Gazette offices, plotting their next move in the revolution of public opinion. So when we say today's media landscape is wild, we are not wrong, but it's not exactly new either. And so in the fiery landscape of America's founding, if that could incite moral panic and encourage direct action, sway public opinion via outright fabrication, then what's really changed today? Certainly not the impulse to do those things. So those are some of the things in 1760s Boston. What's different today? Well, there are a few things. One is the economy is primarily built up of major corporations who alternately are called to take a stand or stop taking a stand on social issues. In 1760, they only knew partisan and unreliable news media. There'd never been anything else. The printing press had only been invented a bit before, and it was just starting to be used for news. What's different today is that our audiences knew a time when trusted media was high, but of course it's not right now. One huge shift impacting the playing field for communicators today is information velocity, for better or for worse. Think about it. A decade ago, it would have been unimaginable to watch state, local, and federal officials debate issues in real time like we're seeing this week. Also, the variety of mediums and formats, another huge shift. Think back just a few years, your CEO or leader might be invited to sit down for a 30-minute or hour-long interview, only to have a couple of lines end up in print or broadcast. Today, you can sit down for a long-form podcast, and everybody can see the context of the conversation and everything that you had to say on the topic, not just an edited version of it. And the last big shift is technology. Well, Samuel Adams absolutely fabricated information he spread to the public, so did Ben Franklin, by the way, and others. The ability to create video, images, and sound that seem to be real but aren't has never been possible to the extent it is today. And as communicators, if you think about what did we used to focus on, it was physical safety, operational crises, cyber attacks, lawsuits. Well, those will always be with us, but today we're often drawn into controversies based on what we say or don't say. So I want to talk about how to prevent this problem in the first place, or at least make it easier to solve. This is, above all, a pragmatic and strategic approach. So the first step is to deeply understand your organization's mission and values and make sure everything you say or do ties back to those values. This will serve to reassure you and your leadership team that the decisions you make won't be likely to blow with the prevailing wind of the moment. Instead, those decisions will become a natural part of a fabric of your organization. And so whether you're Ben and Jerry's or your Hobby Lobby, no one is going to question why you made the decisions that you made. Number 2, beware of mission creep. In other words, C number 1. I've heard personally from leaders at some of the companies at the center of the cultural swirl recently, and this is exactly what they said is happening to them. Steps 3 and 4, use your own voice and your own terminology. Let's talk about using your own voice. Signing on to someone else's letter gives them the power to speak for you. If every single thing in that letter doesn't tie back to your values, again, C number 1, you're allowing mission creep. And if that organization puts out a communication subsequently that you don't entirely agree with, you've rather handed their ability to speak for you. Use your own terminology. I think this is an interesting one. Consider adopting language that clearly describes what your organization is focusing on and why, and don't reduce it to 3 letters. Use full words. Many of you know the language strategy agency Maslansky and Partners. CEO Michael Maslansky wrote a great piece last year as DEI was under fire, pointing out that first, these sorts of acronyms are easy targets. It's easy to throw rocks at seldom defined or clearly understood by all people acronyms. Second, simple acronyms add to the problem that people don't know exactly what they're all about. To adapt Smokey the Bear, only you can prevent culture fires, or at least prepare for them. Another huge step that you can take right now before things go sideways in a crisis, think about the threat of doxing and security threats. There are steps that you can take now to make it hard for people to locate your home address or your CEO's. Unfortunately, we live in a world where intimidation, property damage, and even violence can be a part of a crisis. Do this work now to avoid incredibly uncomfortable situations down the road. I can go into more detail on this specifically if you'd like in the Q&A. Another step is to make sure your tech stack is in order. Social and dark web listening tools to understand emerging issues and reputation threats are absolutely essential. And finally, if you and your team are seen as order takers today, it's time to transform and elevate that role to be trusted advisors. You cannot effectively manage a crisis from outside of the room, and I can talk more about that. So let's get back to the social issues and alignment with your mission and values. If your organization in recent years got a bit off of its stated course in recent years, there are some things to consider. Because what you want is you want alignment, you want continuity, and it all depends on where you want to strategically position your culture and your brand. So there are a couple of options. One is shift your values. Maybe you allowed mission creep, but your organization has become the greatest version of itself through the actions and statements that you've adopted. If that's the case, then true your values up to that, update them. Maybe what the company has become is exactly who you want to be for all of your stakeholders, and the whole executive team and the board is behind it. Great. Now is the chance to get aligned and then tell that story internally and externally. The other option is to shift your positioning. If you've drifted from a great alignment and now there's a gap between why you say you exist and what guides you and what you actually do and say, you've got some work to do. This can be a painful process, but much like a heat shield that burns away in order to preserve a spacecraft and its precious cargo as it re-enters Earth's atmosphere, think of things that don't truly align to your mission and values as ablative material to preserve your organization. One size doesn't fit all, but if they were a good fit, you'll have a chance to correct that. Of course, one reason the issues today can get so hot is that they're not just about facts. They're also about values and emotions and identity. You're not just managing communications, you're managing meaning. And things that simply were previously unimaginable happen. Who would have imagined that the cold-blooded murder of an executive would have resulted in widespread support for his assailant? For you, for the communications professionals, for the crisis manager, that requires a high EQ, calm, curious, courageous, and intellectually curious, and honest operator. And you need to do the hard work of understanding what each of your constituencies are looking for, especially the crazy ones, or the ones that you see as crazy. If you don't do the work to understand them, how can you possibly advise your CEO and executive team on what they should consider? In this world of communications velocity, you need to understand what might happen next. After months and months and months last year of Robbie Starbuck talk around our communication circles, I was absolutely floored at how many people hadn't done the hard work to actually understand what was driving this person who was, really changing the face of what was happening in cultural circles when it comes to corporate America and what we were saying and doing. And there was a podcast where he was out there explaining exactly what was driving him, what he was trying to do, what he was going to do next, what tactics and strategies he would be adopting. And so simply doing the work to understand it could help prepare you, your CEO, your company to help manage some of these issues. So now let's break it down to the audiences. You have to understand what each of them are thinking and what they want. And few of them are going to be homogenous in that regard. Yes, all of your employees want more money, more time off, career advancement, support, sense of belonging, and purpose, but that is about where the agreement ends. And so you're going to need to make some tough calls. In many cases, your best places to start are your employee resource groups. Through very open and honest, transparent communications between employees and the executive level, you might even be able to sufficiently address concerns and simply be ready to take additional communication steps if necessary. That's going to depend on your company, how well the conversations with employees went. Maybe you need to have an all-hands meeting. Obviously, the more people in the conversation, the more likely it is that conversation is no longer going to be private. If the issue is slightly more significant, you'll want to engage the people who distribute or sell your products or services. Again, keep this as authentic and personal as possible. As with employees, your goal here is to understand and gain some understanding. And we don't need to go step by step through each audience, but this is just a reminder that you need to have all of them on your radar for everything that you do. And if it's a significant enough issue, you should consider making a deposit in the bank of mutual trust. Public officials and the media will be grateful for a heads up and not to be caught off guard. And we have a new great coworker that we were talking about recently, and that's Gen AI. Train it on your constituencies, develop some messaging, and then ask it to test those messages against those audiences. You have an instant focus group. But even after you've gone through all of this trouble, saying nothing still might be the best play. I can't tell you how many issues my teams have spent time drafting responses and plans to ultimately decide in consultation with executive teams that taking a wait and see or being ready for further action approach was the way to go. One key learning over the years in the trenches is just because others are speaking out doesn't mean you need to. Another learning is that communicators, as we often inherit crises that we didn't create, but we are paid to help solve them. And I want to point out that calm and emotional clarity is one of the greatest leadership traits you can bring into the room. Bring that presence. So you don't have to be perfect. You do have to be principled. Your calm, clear, and courageous communication may be the most valuable contribution that your organization makes in a moment of crisis. And being prepared and aligned with your values ahead of time will just make that job all the more easier. So as I close, I want to share a simple framework that that'll help you structure your response to just about any issue, and that is acknowledge, explain, and promise. I'm including this because I feel that there are way too many responses out there that take such pains to avoid admitting a mistake, they lose all credibility with the audience. And if you're going to do that, consider saying nothing at all. So you don't have to solve everything in one message, but you do have to show that you see what others feel. That's what I've got. I also put together a slide if we want to get into it at all, maybe during the Q&A on some of those things that the steps you can take to protect you and your executive team in the event of doxing and things like that.
That was great. Thank you very much. And I'm going to go right to the question we have, but I have a question, for all of you. But the first question from our audience is, two panelists talked about the advantages of use of AI. And the question is, what do you see as the ethical and transparency obligations when doing so? So maybe, Michael, Lauren, and Brian, maybe just talk about, how you use AI and some of the ethical considerations you have. Jump in.
Yeah, so here's the way I've approached it. And I remember like all of us, back 3 years ago when it, first came on the scene and there were focus groups and your legal team needed to get involved and they needed to develop guidelines for this. And after a lot of spinning around there and ethics, and all of those things are important. Ethics are important, legal and compliance are important, but what I really came down to the realization is that nothing that was okay to do before generative AI is okay to do today. The same rules apply. So let's talk about customer data or proprietary company information. You couldn't take that outside of your company before. Guess what? You still can't. So it's the education so that people understand that putting it in outside LLMs is the same as sending it over the fence. So that's a key thing to understand. In terms of ethics, I know there was a lot of discussion about, whether disclosing the use of Gen AI was important. I think there are some examples where it is, like let's say creative work product, for example, like an image or something. Important to point out when that's not real. But I think, as a futurist, that Gen AI is going to be part and parcel of absolutely everything every professional does. And so it would kind of be like saying, hey, I used a calculator to, do this math problem. And I don't think that's necessary.
Brian, that was a perfect explanation. And I'm 100% abide by that. It's all the things that you did before still hold true. I think the most important piece is I'm not putting anything about my company into any type of LLM or ChatGPT. Everything in there is already been out, or it's more, I use it more for research, I think, than for drafting internal content. So a lot of times I'm going to meet ex-journalists. So what are their themes? What's their personality? What have they written about recently? Helps me summarize a lot of large, pieces of content. So I think you have to be very careful and I don't know what the rules are in the military right now. I've been out for a while, but you follow the rules, get close with your IT team, get people comfortable, get your executive leadership team comfortable and understanding and educate. And don't do the things that you weren't allowed to do before. There's no change in rules because now you have this tool. It is traceable back to you. It's attached to your email. So just remember that. And Brian, thank you for sharing that you thanked the chat as well. Now I feel much better.
Yeah,
And I love and I am very polite to the bot. So I think that's hopefully I'm going to ask it what my personality is after this call.
And one thing too, and I don't know, Michael's and Scott, what Rutgers is doing, but I don't know if everybody saw, because, I've got a college kid, and I'm encouraging my kids to use it all the time. The Ohio State University, which just happens to be a few miles from where I'm sitting right now, put out, I think this week, that it was going to not just encourage, but require all students in all classes and all professors to use generative AI, and that it's going to be base level core curriculum, which I think is exactly what every higher education institution should be doing. And I'll be picking up the phone and calling St. Louis University to make sure that they're doing that for my kid.
I was just going to jump in and add on the AI topic to really bring a full circle back to today's theme of crisis. I think echoing what both Lauren and Brian have said, certainly generative AI is a great tool to help guide you, but I maybe this is naive on my part. I don't see a time soon where AI can completely manage a crisis from beginning to end, right? Developing messaging, pushing the information out there, counseling executives. I mean, on paper, it seems like perhaps that's things they could do, but certainly I would say even more specifically in a crisis situation, that's where the human intellect and emotion and all those things that AI isn't capable of doing, that's where the rubber meets the road. So just to factor that into how AI could be used in a crisis situation.
And down the road,
And
that's going to change, right? I mean, you can build an agent that could, every step of the workflow that you just managed could absolutely be built into an agent. Would it do it as well as any experienced, human being? No. But it won't be long where it can get a lot of the way all by itself, and then we'll just need to hop in and say, boy, you made a mistake, or I don't think you thought about this.
Right.
Well, and I would just add, by the way, obviously, right now it lacks judgment. There's certain things it lacks, but I also would call out that humans have bias. We have we have tendencies. So people are quick to point out some of the challenges that AI presents, but I would say humans can be just as flawed. So I mean, I treat AI like a collaborator, not as gospel, not as my to do everything for me, but it's a
Right.
collaborator for the input, and it certainly has a bias, and hopefully it's slightly different than mine, which I hopefully can help counterbalance. So, but I think, someone who works in, obviously at a PR agency to diversity clients, but also has my foot in higher ed. I think, for a short time there was this fear factor in higher ed that we can't, be afraid of it. And I think the first generation of students, I think were a little afraid of it, but I think people are realizing it's there. We have to teach people how to use it, how to, effectively, ethically, and morally, and so forth. So I think more and more institutions are recognizing we can't, just simply run away from it. One question I have, and there's a few more questions coming in. So, and here's maybe something AI can help with. Let me put you all in the shoes of a PR person for a sports team. You've been invited to the White House, and you're thinking to yourself, and by the way, maybe it doesn't matter which administration is in, but you're thinking, some audiences are not going to like this. Some audiences are going to like, how do you navigate? And is kind of define today's crisis, where you didn't even do anything wrong. You just have to make a decision where to go and what to do. And next thing you know, you're embroiled in this controversy just for doing something that was kind of, just done all the time. And by the way, it happens on all sides. I'm not making a left or right argument, but you're the PR director for a sports team. What do? What counsel are you offering to the owner of the team?
First step I would take is to sit down with the players, because the players are going to be the ones standing there in the White House or out front of the White House, and their body language is going to say it all, and then they're going to tweet about it afterward, or they're going to take a media interview, and if they're unhappy that they were there, that's going to show. So, but on the other hand, if they say, "Hey, absolutely, like what an honor to go to the White House," I think you send them, and some fans are going to be upset about that, and that's just the way it is. But if all of your players were telling you that they didn't want to go for whatever reason, then I think you'd have a reasonable, reason to counsel your owner, or that, hey, we probably shouldn't go.
Others?
Very, very difficult situation,
Yes.
in particularly now. You go back to the values of the company. So like any decision, whether or not you're going to talk about something or share something, does it support the mission of the company, and is it within the values of that organization? So as in the military, we had, you have very specific values at the last two companies in corporate I've been in. These are written out. There's a credo for almost every big company right now. So you go back to that. And if you sense check within that, you check with the leadership team, does this make sense? And then you go ahead and make the decision, and you stick to it.
And Michael, I think that's a great example, right? Because not every crisis is caused from the outside in. Sometimes companies can create their own crises. And I think that's a perfect example, right? I fully agree with both Lauren and Brian of, getting a temperature check on what's the sentiment. But I think by not going, you're attracting more attention, and you're kind of fueling that news cycle longer than, if you do go and you have a couple of folks protest or not show up. So I would say from a strategic counsel perspective, you have to also consider that as the person at the seat at the table who's counseling, leadership.
And what do you do, by the way, if your publics are at odds? I mean, so for example, obviously there's a lot of organizations now are trying to navigate some economic issues. I mean, your investors say cost cutting, make my stock go up. your employees that say, invest in me, don't fire my best friend, I want to get promoted. The community and where you have your plants saying, don't close. In fact, we need you to do more. Your customers want cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. I mean, there more, and then you throw in some of the cultural divides. So what do you do when all your audiences not only don't align, but maybe in complete conflict? What do you do?
Are you saying that PR people have to make difficult decisions, Michael?
Yeah.
Shocking.
I mean, you got to look at the business realities. I mean, no, every single one of us who's worked in, a for-profit, publicly traded company knows that no amount of, uh, you know, bad PR for a couple of days is going to stop a company from making strategic changes, big strategic changes that it views, if it doesn't do it this week, it's going to have to do it in 6 months. So then you're just going to have to figure out what's the best way to get that done and what's the best way to communicate that.
Mhm.
So it's always hard, but of course, if we could always say, hey, what's the temperature of the public? Would they like this to happen? What's the temperature of the workforce? Would they like this to happen? Nope, they wouldn't. Okay, sorry, CEO, we're not gonna. I got to tell you, you can't do that. That doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
How you deliver the message. We all have multiple different audiences, different stakeholders that have different goals, and you know them really well. You know your employee base really well. You know your customer base really well. You know your investor community really well. You lean into the experts with your HR team, with your IR team to figure out, well, how is this going to be received? You test it. You be thoughtful about how you're delivering the message, where you're delivering it. Timing is also super important. If you're not connected with the rest of the organization and you're making a big announcement about, I don't know, a great earnings, and then at the same week there's a major layoff, you have to think about the timing. So being really connected, sitting around the table with the other your leadership team to know what's happening all across the business. That's the job of the comms person. I think that's the job of the PR person, or CCO, whatever you want to call yourself, is to connect all of those dots. And I don't make any big decisions for the business. I help connect. I help make sure that internally we're communicating so that we communicate well externally. But the situation that you described, Michael, the business strategy, part of that, certainly you want to be a part of that, but you're not, I don't consider myself as the person driving the strategy and the financials for the business by any means, but certainly will advise and counsel on the timing, who, what, where, when, why we're delivering those messages. Treat
Yeah,
people with human dignity, always, always. If you have to let go of 3 people or 3,000 people, the message and the thoughtfulness that goes into that should be the same.
and back to the discussion of audiences, that I was talking about. This is where it's really appropriate, to give heads up, because you want to really preserve those relationships, whether it's with elected officials, media, whatever. You've got and your workforce. So you've got an opportunity to take some steps with real grace and transparency, that's going to put deposits into that bank of trust. And there's nothing more important than trust with each of those stakeholders.
And who's delivering the message as well. Not everything should come from the CEO. Not everything should come from the CFO. Like, think about who's delivering the message. Does that audience know that person? I think that matters a lot.
Absolutely.
Michael, anything to add to that?
The example that popped in my head when you asked that question, Michael, and I'll probably date myself a little bit, but I feel like it was at least a decade ago, and I'm sure Lauren and Brian probably have experienced this working for public companies as well, as when the CEO compensation package gets announced, or even worse, when they cash in $500 million of stock 3 days after they just fired 1,000 people. Some of that tone deafness, despite the best counseling from HR, from legal, from finance, from communications, those things happen. And so I think those are some of the scenarios that you really should anticipate. But on the flip side, that's the executive compensation, conversation was happening a decade ago, and nothing really has changed. I mean, executives are making more now than ever. And so some of these issues, although real, I feel like just kind of precipitate themselves, and kind of just sit and wait for the next big crisis to happen. So it could be very tricky to navigate. As Lauren said, we're the people who are connecting the dots and getting the information out. We're not necessarily those decision makers.
Now, I've heard all of you talk about, what we say and how we say it and who says it and all the aspects of communications. But one of the other things I think you've all mentioned is the role of the counselor. And probably that could be our most important role. How do you position yourself to be the person the CEO says after the meeting, hey, Michael, Lauren, Brian, stay back. I want to ask you a question. Or sneaks back into your office and says, you got 2 minutes. What tips can we give to the folks on this session to become that person?
I think a lot about it is explaining what the value proposition of having that sort of relationship is. It's not personal for you, it's not ego for you, it's being able to efficiently deliver the most value. You're paying me. If you want, you want the best results for the company, we need to be able to have trust and access to each other. And it's hard to do your job effectively from the hallway outside the boardroom.
I would say spend more time listening than talking in a lot of those meetings. What you have to say is probably best said maybe after the meeting with your CEO. So if you sit around the table and you're just talking the whole time, I think that tends to hurt your credibility. So spend more time listening and provide that outside view. So what's happening externally. Give examples of things that you're hearing from your other, comms network. I spend a lot of time with other chief comms officers or leaders of PR, one, to see what's going on in the organization, how they're handling things. I can then provide that out, not giving away any type of proprietary information or talking about, business strategy, but just the external environment, the media environment, and then be able to provide that outside view looking in. Because a lot of folks around the table at most boardrooms or executive tables don't have that external view. A lot of it is very much focused inward on the business, as it should be. So you're sort of the special one, right? You should be pulling in what everyone else outside in the world is saying. And as you start to build up that trust with your executive team or your CEO, they'll start to come to you more and more. You can't force it. It takes time. You have to be patient. You have to just spend a lot of time listening.
Absolutely. And I learned that lesson very early on, being in a police, law enforcement organization where, as Lauren knows from her time in the military, rank means everything. The marks that you have on your shoulders, mean a lot, carry a lot of weight. And so to be the most junior person in an organization, speaking with, the chief at the time, the most senior person, and having somebody come ask you for advice, it could be very intimidating. And so a muscle that I've kind of trained and built up over the years is having that fortitude to look someone in the eye, whether they're the head of your department or a world-renowned CEO or whomever it might be, and just say, you're wrong, or I think that's the wrong approach, or whatever counsel. It takes a lot. And, oftentimes you leave that room sweating a little bit, but I often find when you really do step into that counselor role, it can be quite rewarding.
I heard a podcast. Go ahead, Lauren. Go ahead.
Yeah, I two things that come to mind. I try to think about how I'm saying something, if it's to correct or to change perception, or what is the result I want. And so, many times do I want to, in the past, have I wanted to come in and said, this is crazy. What are you thinking? Or maybe you just phrase it where, have you thought about this way, maybe, or come in a little bit, softer. When I was still on active duty and I was working in public affairs, there was a meeting that we were having with all of the senior generals and at the time, and that we were in a big boardroom in the Pentagon, and I typically sat like on the back side, right? I never had a seat at the table. I didn't have a placard with my name and public affairs officer, and I kept noticing that there was there was empty seats, and so as a young captain, I think I was way junior to the other folks in the room. I just said, you know what, I'm going to sit at the table today and see what nobody kicked me out. I didn't say anything. I sat there, I listened, and then I don't know how long it took until I did have a name placard at the table. And I took the seat quietly, but I took a seat and I made sure that I kept it.
Well, my dad, it's funny you say that. My dad, I'm a second generation counselor. My dad started our firm in the 50s. And he said to be successful in PR, you need a few body parts. You need a good heart and soul because it's about connecting people. You need a good brain because you have to be analytical. You need strong elbows because you got to force yourself at that table. And you need a good butt to get down and do the work. So that was a great story about the elbows. You need, we all need those skill sets.
Yeah.
And another little story I heard was a guy who was brought on to be a mentor to the CEO of Airbnb. And he was an established guy who was retired, but a younger CEO said, I want somebody who's more senior just to be my mentor. And they sat in a meeting. He was a little over aggressive. And he realized, in the meeting, I have to act like the intern. Outside the meeting, I have to act like the mentor. And I thought that was just a good way to kind of think, intern, I'm going to be this absorbing everything that's going on. And after the meeting, then I'm going to be the one who's going to give that counsel. So, but that's good stuff. Everybody's kind of mentioned too silos within the organization. How different people, the CFO's thinking this, the HR person. Everybody's kind of thinking. What's the other thing I do think that just doesn't get enough attention? Because again, we're so focused on what do we say and who do we say it to, but how do we align these different entities? What other things could we be doing to align all these different entities to be moving in the right direction? Headwinds don't matter if you're not going in the right direction. I mean, you've got to all be in the same direction. And sometimes even put aside your various publics, sometimes internally you're not. What can the PR person be to be that guiding force?
Well, I mean, Lauren talked about it. I think, that the role that we play as connector across the organization can't be understated. It may be one of the most important roles we play because it helps protect the company from own goals, right? There are all kinds of times where, and Lauren, you talked about timing. It's the same thing, right? I mean, we know that this business is planning to make X, Y, or Z announcement. And when this business or this functional area says we're going to do something, we're the ones who get to see that and say, "Ooh, there's a dissonance there. Danger, Will Robinson. Like, let's rethink that." Or lots of bad things are, need to be announced, by a lot of different people at a lot of different times, and you say, "You know what? Boy, if we're going to have to say this, we should say it all at one time. Like, let's just, can we please just organize?" So I think what Lauren was pointing to earlier is the lesson for that one.
This is an experience I had a few years ago. It's probably true in a lot of places, but when you put information down on let's say a press release or something that like words on paper, all of a sudden, and you say, okay, I'm going to, this is going to go out Friday, Thursday at 4:00. We're all so busy, but all of a sudden everyone pays attention when you put it on something like a press release. It feels so official. And I can't tell you, I mean, this has happened to me over the years, how many times when you think you've got everybody aligned, you send it out to, last check, here it is, it's all formatted. And then it's like, so-and-so didn't know about this, or that conflicts with this part of the business. So like, once you get it down on, and that's why I actually love press releases, not because it's going to get news or it's going to show up on everyone, all these editors' news desks, and they're going to want to call me and write a story. A lot of times it's just about getting that internal alignment and that messaging, because the words are on paper. All of a sudden it feels very real, and you have to focus in on it because this is going to go out and this is who we are and this is how we're being represented outside. So I've always been a big fan. I know they may be outdated these days, but I would use them for that more so than even
That's
trying
interesting.
to
An
get
alignment
news.
tool.
It's an alignment tool. Yeah.
That
Well, just
process,
because you put it in the
Lauren,
format of a press release doesn't mean it needs to actually be moved on PR Newswire
Exactly.
or whatever, right?
right.
You can just place it on your newsroom online and it
Right.
accomplishes the same thing.
Exactly.
And I was going to say that process that Lauren just described, as we so lovingly called it at J&J, it was called walking the square, right? So in times of when there wasn't a crisis unfolding and you had to move, super quick, to get a press release out, you would have to take it to 10 different people. They would all have to bless it. They all had to put their stamp of approval on it. And so, Michael, I think you asked a really important question. I would just kind of, reframe it a little bit. I think there's a time and a place to do all of the internal politics and walking the square during normal times. But when a crisis happens and it's game time, you don't have that luxury. And I think that really brings it back to the topic of trust that we talked about at the beginning of this call is, when a press release has to go out in 20 minutes, you don't have the luxury of, getting buy-in from everyone. That's when it's important that your CEO or your leader trusts you implicitly to say the right thing, to send it to the right people, to manage it. And so again, I think crisis situation really does change the game significantly.
I want to build on something about the press release, if you will, and the online and even trust and AI in particular. That one thing about AI, I think we often talk about AI as a content creator or collaborator. It's also an audience now, and the content we put out on our websites and that go into credible sources like news outlets are feeding the LLMs. And so when you go on and ask, tell me more about company X, it's pulling from your website. It's pulling from that article in whether it's the New York Times or even a trade publication. In fact, I will always ask, what are your sources? I actually had a client the other day. We did just a hard hat tour. We got a bunch of reporters showed up. The next day, I went in and asked, what type of investment is this company making in its facilities? Those stories appeared in ChatGPT. So I think that's a huge boon to PR that our content is now, I mean, and I think, AI is going to become everyone's personal concierge. And it's going to,
Yeah.
what should I eat today? How do I make this food to, what college should my child go to? And, criteria. So, some of these tools that people have, I think, a little passe or no longer relevant, I think are going to become more relevant
Yeah.
because they're now being used by these large language models to feed to someone else. So I think it's more, as important as ever. So I just that just
There's
popped into my mind.
so we all know SEO, right? Search
Mhm.
engine optimization. We're always looking to maximize the content across search engines. So still important, right? Because most people still, not most, but people still go to Google, but we have the concept of generated engine optimization now. And I don't know what the statistic is. I read it recently, but by the end of next year, by the end of 2026, the percentage of searches are going to be through some sort of Gen AI platform over your Google. And then, Google's trying to use AI now as well. And in their searches, they give you that little, AI generated answer before you get through all your sources. But there's ways to, Michael, I think that's so spot on. And that's such a great proof point too. It's sourcing from all these different places. Like how is your company and your message showing up in ChatGPT?
Mhm.
How are you showing up? What's your brand, right? Have you asked yourself, who is Brian Grace? Who is Michael Lauer? Like, what comes up? I'm going to do that later tonight too, I think.
No, it's so true. And by the way, even especially in a crisis where, all of a sudden your company might not have been a front page news,
Mhm.
or they want a deeper dive into a policy you've had, you better make sure that ChatGPT or whatever, tool you're using has the most, I mean, in many ways, it's like Wikipedia. You've got to make sure that's up to date. So,
Right.
I mean, I think this is an opportunity. And by the way, there is one question about AI and its impact on headcount and the future of employment in PR. And I'd just like to get everybody's feedback on where do you think we are with headcount, employment, and what's it going to mean to people trying to get jobs or get promoted in PR?
One thing I wanted to say really quick on the last topic before we jump onto this is you may or may not know that a lot of agencies out there are developing tools that can kind of try to quantify what Lauren was talking about, right? Because we all knew click position, there are all these different things that allowed us to understand our performance in that previously SEO optimized world. And now through single or zero click searches where it's going through the LLM and nobody's clicking on a Google result, we really have to understand and have a way to quantify what do we mean? What are we shooting for? What's good? Did we improve? Did we not? Where is it getting its information from? And so that's a whole, I mean, you could go down a rabbit hole on that topic, but I'm glad we're talking about it because it's really important.
Yeah. I work with a marketing firm in New Jersey. Actually, they're headquartered in Morristown, and they've been building their own tool just for that, Brian. And the guy that Matt, that the owner of that marketing firm, he was the one who we were just having this conversation because we're updating our websites and all these things, and it's like, well, what's the SEO ability? And it's like, whoa, that's not even going to matter in a year,
Right.
maybe, right?
No, and we've all got to stay ahead, and just circling back to the role of this entire program, it's really just to make sure we should, as PR professionals, we should always be retooling. We should all be staying ahead of the news. I mean, I think that if all this is about being the counselor, the trusted advisor, if we don't stay on top of this stuff, the CEO is going to come to us once for our for clarity on AI, and if we can't answer it appropriately, we may never get asked again. So I think we all have to be as prepared as possible.
Michael,
Any
question
closing
on
thoughts
headcount?
before I turn over to Scott, who's going to roll the wheel? But any more closing thoughts? I'll let everybody have one more thought before we turn over to Scott.
I was just to answer the question on hiring. I have not seen that yet. What I have seen though, and what I am myself doing, is making sure that anyone on my team is trained and knows how to use and the best practices for any type of LLM or Gen AI tool. So I don't necessarily see jobs going away, but I do see the future of those jobs. You better know how to operate those tools and leverage all new technology.
And I'll recommend a podcast that I was watching just last night. If you're familiar with The Diary of a CEO podcast, I watched one. It looks like it posted 4 weeks ago, and it's called, if you're searching for it, AI Agents Emergency Debate. These jobs won't exist in 24 months. That's my way of saying, Michael, no matter what any of us, there's nothing unique we can say about being PR leaders or communications leaders that is any different than any other profession in terms of what will be the impact on employment. It will change.
We've got to be agile. We've got to. Darwin doesn't say it was the fittest; it was the one who can adapt the best. So that's the key here.
Right.
So with that, Scott, I'm going to turn over to you, and we're gonna give someone an opportunity to take some programming here. Well, thank you all very much, and just Scott, just it will be recorded, it will be available, so everybody can go back, take notes, share it with their coworkers and colleagues. You'll all probably get an email follow-up as well with more information about the Rutgers programming. I think if you go to LinkedIn, we've tagged everyone in this conversation, so feel free to connect back to all of us. Thank you all for your time, your busy executives, and thank you all for your contribution to the information space and helping us all navigate this crazy world we're living in. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.